Hi, this is science writer Gary Robbins. Well, there have been a couple of disturbing climate-related studies out of the Scripps Institution of Oceanography this week, the latest coming yesterday. In fact, this latest study says there's a potential existential threat to humanity from climate change by the year 2050. Now, it's a very small chance of something like that happening, but they put it in a scientific paper and they're talking about it pretty broadly. This study comes from V. Ramanathan. He's a famous climate scientist. He's one of the people that advised Pope Francis when it came to talking about climate change. The Pope later came out and urged the world to do something about global warming. Ramanathan has been published around the world in a lot of policy, including the Paris Accords, stems in part from his work. Now, what does this really mean? He's talking about the fact that they need, what he says, are two new categories: catastrophic climate change and existential climate change. By catastrophic, he means that so many things could happen over the next roughly 35 years that society would find it hard to adapt. It would be catastrophic. We could adapt in some level, but we'd find it very difficult to do so. The other category, existential or unknown, is a case where they say, well, humanity probably could not survive that. Now, for the catastrophic category, it says there's roughly a 5% chance of that happening between now and 2050. The existential is less than that, maybe down to a couple percent. I spoke to Ramanathan yesterday, and he says, think of it this way. If there was a 5% chance that you knew that you were going to die in a plane crash, you wouldn't get on that plane. So it's something that's really hard to visualize, and it is really small, but there's that to think about. Dr. Ramanathan said that he came out and used those very strong terms because he had been reviewing a lot of the data that he and other people had collected over decades, going back to the 1980s. And he said he finally came to the conclusion that he had to talk in more direct terms: catastrophic and existential. Many scientists believe this to be true as well. Some politicians are also saying, we've got to look at this in greater depth, particularly in the wake of Hurricanes Harvey and Irma. The mayor in Miami talked about the fact that he thought that these events were a moment to kind of pause and say, where are we really? What can we do about it? Other people don't agree. Scott Pruitt, who is the administrator of the EPA, has said that he is not convinced that there is a direct connection between carbon dioxide as generated by vehicles and climate change. So there's still a great deal of tension. It's a hugely polarized issue. Another Scripps researcher came out with a report this week that talked about climate change and more specifically our weather. What this report says is that the amount of rain that California gets is not going to go down, but the way it comes to us is going to change. He believes that we're going to have fewer storms, but when we have storms, we're going to have the really big ones, like the atmospheric river that ended the drought earlier this year in California. Remember the tremendous amount of rain that they had in Northern California, and it finally wiped out the drought. Scripps thinks that we're more likely to have more episodes like that over time due to natural variability, so it's not just humans, natural variability, and due to carbon dioxide and other fossil fuels. Now, this is something that might not play out for a long period of time, but if it did, there are a lot of problems because it comes to the management of water. If more of the water falls faster, it's harder to catch. They think more of it will fall in Northern California, which would mean that we would get less down here. And it also could mean that we would be drier for much longer periods of time in a place like San Diego County, which would increase the wildfire danger. We're just going to see at this point what is going to happen. Reporting from the Union-Tribune, I'm Gary Robbins.